pleased to introduce this panel, Working and Saving for Generations Ahead, the Generations Ahead, as we consider how to ensure the financial security for future generations and to enhance the overall savings and health and wealth, things we've been talking about, sort of a theme running through today's event. We'll have a discussion of the economics of programs or plans, kind of a little of both, that provide funds at birth. And we'll be highlighting research and considering models for doing this. So we're excited about this panel. It's an important topic and something that we're going to be focusing on at our global conference as well. So the session is moderated by Mike Pivovar, EVP of MI Finance, whom I introduced already. And his paper that he worked on with Rob Shapiro was just released yesterday, The Economic Impact of Invest America Accounts. So he'll be talking about that, but Mike's the moderator, and Rob will highlight the work that he's done over time. And Lauren Palumbo, leader of Future Growth Initiatives at Prudential Financial, will be discussing their research and highlighting a little about Generation Beta that I didn't know existed. We're already in Generation Beta, which makes me feel really old because I have been fighting this, but I really am a boomer. So just like 1 year in, I keep saying, well, I don't really identify with boomers, but I am one. And then the Honorable Laura Montoya, the New Mexico State Treasurer, is going to be discussing the new program that she's working on, and a really impactful program and very ambitious program related to baby bonds and giving a larger amount. And she has some interesting facts and statistics. So, Mike and Rob's paper is more of a big picture analysis. So join me in welcoming the panel. Thanks.
I think we got testing. Yep. All right. Great. Thanks, Cheryl, and once again, thanks to Barb Marder and her team at eBree for being such great partners on this wonderful event. As Cheryl mentioned, I have the great pleasure of working with her and Mairead on our Lifetime Financial Security Program. And when we were deciding what to call our program, we discussed different alternatives that had the word retirement in them. But we quickly realized that even though retirement planning is a hugely important topic and a primary focus of our work, we wanted to let people know we're focused on helping people achieve financial security throughout their lifetimes. And so I'm really pleased to moderate this session, which focuses on younger generations and the beginnings of their lifetime. So as Cheryl mentioned, we have a wonderful panel of experts who's going to discuss some new developments in both the private and public sectors. She's already introduced the folks, so I'll skip that. And before I turn to our first speaker, Lauren Palumbo, I want to remind everyone that we'll save some time at the end of the session for Q&A. If you have questions as we go along, raise your hand. I'm a former academic professor, so I'm used to people interrupting and asking questions, and so happy to do that. So Lauren, let me turn to you first. First of all, so your title at Prudential Financial is Leader of Future Growth Initiatives for the Retirement Strategies business. What does that mean in terms of a role?
We handle all of the really cool things in retirement. So what we're focused on, what I wake up every day thinking about really is out 1, 2, 5, 10 years, both on the wealth management and the defined contribution side. Where are there opportunities for new markets? Where is there opportunity for growth and expansion? And what we're really focused on now is the idea of delivering retirement income in brand new ways. So bringing insurance protection into the investment space on both the wealth and the DC side.
Oh, that's great. So as Cheryl mentioned, starting in January of this year, there's the first of the new generation called Generation Beta. So, by the way, if anyone wants to feel old, the oldest Gen Zs will turn 28 this year, and the oldest millennials will turn 44 this year. So for those of us in Gen X or before, we're feeling really old at this point. So you recently released a comprehensive and really fascinating report called Generation Beta, Redefining Life Longevity in Retirement, which includes extensive research, interviews, focus groups, and a survey. So tell us about some of the key findings of this report.
Yeah, so as of January 1, Generation Alpha is done. We've moved on to Beta. And Beta, think about it as really a generation that's going to be defined by continuous development. And there are a number of really interesting themes that were woven through the research. One is this generation will be marked by technology. This is a generation that is going to have to be adaptable, flexible, is requiring customization and personalization in all interactions. And really, they're just this generation will have to experience a radically different world than we all live today, with technology, with changing social and economic norms. Some of the findings that I found most interesting: 68% of those surveyed believe that Generation Beta will have more pets than children. That does deserve a little bit of a chuckle, but when you actually pause for a moment and think about the implications of that, when you think about that on products and solutions that will be needed, financial investing, and certainly multi-generational caregiving, that really changes the way we'll think about all of this moving forward. Generation Beta, in terms of how they work, completely different than most of our experiences today. 80% of those surveyed believe that Generation Beta babies, as they navigate through life, they'll have more than 3 distinct careers, spanning over 10 companies that they'll actually work for. And 86% of those surveyed believes that the jobs that Generation Beta has aren't even existed. They don't even exist today. So really, really kind of different norm. When you talk about healthcare, 71% of those surveyed believe that Generation Beta will have individualized healthcare based on their DNA. So really just changing all facets of the way we live. And at Prudential, we did this because we wanted to really shed light into the world that this next generation will be living in, because we're so committed to providing protection to all generations and really helping people live better lives longer.
Yeah, I mean, it was an absolutely fascinating report. In addition to the pets data that you brought in, a couple of the data points here hit some of the key themes that we heard in our earlier sessions. 54% believe that AI will be able to empathize with humans in the future, not just interact, but empathize with humans. Another one was 55% believe the Generation Beta will be wealthier than their parents, but at the same time, 61% predicted they will face more economic uncertainty. Related to the first session with Brian Portnoy, people aren't dumb, but life is hard, right? And life is going to get a lot more complicated, a lot more hard, a lot more economic uncertainty. And then finally, the one where it's 80% of Generation Beta parents agree that parents should ideally start saving from their child's retirement since birth. When that'll transition to the next part of the conversation. Did you want to add to that?
No, we'll get there. That's great.
Yeah, it's good. So that'll bring us to the next part. So what we're going to talk about next are 3 different programs: one at the state level, one at the federal level, and one in the private sector that really start targeting savings and investment at birth. So first, let me ask Laura Montoya, who is the treasurer of New Mexico. You have a program that you're pushing forward that would allow every baby born in New Mexico starting July 1st to be given a so-called baby bond. And many of us have heard about different baby bond proposals in the past. Tell us about sort of the key features of this program, why it's important to New Mexico, and the expected financial impacts. And we'll get to the second round of questions, we'll get to broader sort of social and economic impacts. But give us the nuts and bolts of the program.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. So the New Mexico Baby Bond Program is something that we're thinking will have $7,000 per baby born starting July 1st. We proposed a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 397. We're currently in our New Mexico legislative session right now. It's sponsored by Senators Leo Jaramillo and Senator Antonio Momaestas. And what it would do is it would allow for us to have generational wealth. And so sometimes it's called baby bond because sometimes people bond it out. But in New Mexico, we have the second largest permanent fund in the country. We're at about $60 billion in our state investment council. And so it's $700 million that would equate to every baby born, about 22,000 children are born per year in New Mexico, and that would last until 2060. And we would utilize it for home ownership, for a home in New Mexico so that it's building our own economy, being able to utilize it for educational purposes, and then if we can get the anti-donation situation resolved, some entrepreneurship and retirement. And that's baby bonds in a nutshell. It's about $700 million of a cost, but when people say, whoa, that's a lot of money, I think, wow, I'm helping invest $100 million to $500 million for every deal that we do with SIC every month, several of them. So to invest in our children, invest in our families and in our community. Imagine you as a young woman having a child, being able to have somebody be able to say that government is here to have your back and support you, and that your child has some type of investment already situated for them. Or being that child when you were 17 or 18 years old and you didn't know how you were going to make ends meet and maybe go to school and work 3 jobs just so that you can try to do better for yourself than what maybe your parents were able to do. And somebody said, hey, I got you. I'm going to go ahead and help you out with, rent or with a home or a down payment or your education. I think this is a way of bridging the gap of inequity. It's a way of building wealth. And when you look at New Mexico statistics, which we'll get into later, it tells you even more so how important and critical this is for particularly my state.
And so the bill has been introduced in the legislature, and they're actively looking at it right now?
Yes, so there's 2 bills. One is more of a task force, and the money was just stripped. The other one is in Senate tax and has not had a hearing yet. But Senate Bill 397 and House Bill 7.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
So Rob, yesterday the Milken Institute released a report you co-authored with yours truly, titled The Economic Impact of Invest America Accounts. Tell us about these accounts. They're a little bit of a twist on the baby bond issue here. What are the key financial features and what are the expected financial impacts?
Right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The Invest America proposal really stands on the shoulders of the baby bond movement, which has been going on for about 20 years. And it is a variation. The variation is that the account is not a savings account. It's an account which is invested in a broad index of U.S. companies, say the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000. This produces certain variations from the baby bond program, principally because the rate of return on U.S. equities is higher than the rate of return on savings accounts. Since 1957, that return has averaged 10%, 6.5% after inflation. If you take a more recent period, say from the beginning of the 70s, noting that the 70s were a flat market, the return is still 9.6%. And the advantage of that is simply that the wealth grows faster. And we'll also talk about what we think are the social benefits of this particular approach. Let me say all these approaches are right. All these approaches address the fundamental problem that a majority of American children are born into families that do not save at all. And they then confront a series of life challenges that require capital. And they don't have it. And so all of these are addressing it. We did simulations, and because that's what economists do, if you started with $1,000, boy, I'd love to start with $7,000 incidentally. Yeah. If you start with $1,000, in 20 years you've got $8,000. If parents or employers also can contribute to these accounts. The employers could deduct it. The parents cannot, because that would skew the distributional benefits of the plan towards higher income people. They could give $500, $1,000, $500 or $1,000 a year. If employers did it, they would be subject to the Treasury's non-discrimination clause, that if you're doing it for one employee within a group, you have to do it for all employees within that group, just like we do with health care and pension plans. And, you know, if you start with $2 or $3 or $5 or $7,000, you've got college tuition. You have a serious down payment on a home. You have the capital required to start a business. And in all three cases, the primary barrier today is savings or capital. Most of the young businesses that fail because of inadequate capital or inadequate access to capital, which is to say inadequate collateral. Similarly, the greatest hurdle for young people to buy a home is the down payment. So this is an attempt to address the real world barriers to people improving their lives.
So Rob, we have a lot of folks from the private sector here. In these accounts, what would be the role of asset managers in the private sector in these accounts?
These accounts would be managed by private financial institutions overseen by the Treasury. We've spoken to some major financial institutions, and they've all said that they would either charge a minimal fee or no fee at all, because it's a good way to get customers, and there isn't going to be movement in these accounts, which requires, you know, effort and money by the financial institution for at least 18 years.
Great. And you know, unlike the New Mexico Baby Bonds program, it's not currently in the federal legislature yet, but we're very, very close. We have been in contact with Senator Hagerty and Senator Booker, who are working on a bill that they're going to co-sponsor and be a bipartisan bill that would be introduced in the Senate very soon. They're still working out some technical issues. Many of you in the retirement industry know that retirement type accounts touch multiple committees on the Hill, and so they're working out sort of who has different roles on those things. So we're looking forward to that. Of course, the bill that may be introduced may be slightly different than what we look at. We look at what we call the plain vanilla version, $1,000, and those sorts of things. So, and let me come back to Lauren here. So you didn't just do a report about Generation Beta. Prudential Financial now is stepping up as a private sector firm, and you have something, and I practiced saying this 100 times. I'm going to try to say it. Beta Baby Bonus. Sorry, so
doesn't he do a good job?
Yeah, Beta Baby Bonus. What is that, and what do you think the financial impacts of that are?
So in addition to the turning of the new generation, Prudential recently celebrated our 150th anniversary. So to really commensurate both of those events, Prudential, for all babies born on January 1st of this year, if you put through an application on our website, you sign up, we will give a $150 bonus to that baby. What's behind that is really the message that it's never too early to save. It's never too early to save for retirement. When you think about that $150 invested just using kind of simple average annual compound interest, when that beta baby turns 70, it's $100,000. So it's not immaterial. And we did this because we are really committed to expanding access to retirement security across all generations. So with those born just a couple of months ago to kick off this new generation, all the way through those that are currently in market, we're equally committed there, and really believe very strongly in the partnership between the private sector, government, as well as employers, and really coming together to provide solutions so that we can meet the needs across those generations. It's really interesting, 81% of individuals that we surveyed in our report believe that financial institutions have the power to change the financial service industry for future generations. I have 3 little ones in those future generations, so I literally and figuratively am awoken every morning kind of thinking about that. And I think what's going on across all 3 of those efforts is really a great depiction of that.
Oh, that's great. So Laura and Rob, I know you guys are chomping at the bit here. There's not just the financial impacts of this, but the broader social and economic ones. Laura, let me go to you first. You touched upon this, why it's so important for New Mexico, but let's get into those broader issues.
A little bit, but I wanted to show you now that this clicker, somebody's helping me click, how this works. So if you had a $3,000 amount per child, $5,000 or $7,000, that's what the annual appropriation would be. So when we looked at those numbers, we realized that it's better if we did the full appropriation, you get more bang for your buck. And when you're looking at 3, 5, or 7, you look at inflation, you look at everything else, you actually get more money at the end. So by the time your child turns 18 or a child turns 18 that gets a baby bond, they'd have approximately $20,000 to $25,000. If they're 35 years of age, it's about $75,000. We found through the data through Echo Northwest that in reality, most 18-year-olds would not use their baby bond right away. In New Mexico, almost all education is free now, so they wouldn't need to use it as much. So if they kept it for that course of time, they'd be able to end up with that. If they didn't use it and they had a retirement, it'd be $175,000, between $175,000 and $375,000, I believe is the amount. So why? Well, in New Mexico, and if somebody can click to the first page, I'd appreciate it. In New Mexico, we ended up having almost 80% of all of our children born into Medicaid. We're the #1 Medicaid recipients in the United States. In addition to that, when you're looking at how much we spend on supplemental funds, it's about $10 billion per year. So in reality, $700 million is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. A lot of people are forgetting to ask, what's the cost if we don't do this? Yes. And I think that's sometimes the most important. Elected officials have a tendency for instant gratification, right? You need to take money back to your district. You need to be able to have something that supplements right now. But we as leaders need to understand, and we get the pressure from people like you, that we need to be visionary about what do we see for our future and for our children's future. It's critical that we're able to look at things like this. So if you look at the first pages, can you get me to that point, somebody? There you go. So you'll see where it tells you about what baby bonds are, but on the New Mexico statistics, you'll see that our numbers don't look so good. So even though we have the 2nd largest wealth fund in the country, we're one of the poorest states in the nation. Even though we have 2nd largest in crude oil production, we still have one of the lowest rates in education. And so there's a disconnect between where we're at on our sovereign wealth fund and where we're at educationally and economically. And so the idea of bridging these 2 gaps, even suicide rates, for example, as a benefit, suicide rates in New Mexico are double the national average. So is violence. We're #1 in crime. So all of these numbers tell us clearly there's a disconnect of what we're doing today versus what we need to do for tomorrow. And so those numbers are critical to understanding the importance of something like baby bonds, but especially and in particularly in a place like New Mexico where we're a majority minority state. It's predominantly Latino and Native. And yet, disproportionately, they're the ones that don't have the houses, they're the ones that don't have income, they're the ones that are traveling and leaving our state to go to other places. So why wouldn't we invest the most that we can into our children and our families?
Oh, that's great. So Rob, at the federal level, the program that we're looking at, how is it designed to make sure that the benefits don't accrue to just the people, the wealthiest people who don't need the money, and it gets to folks like that Laura was talking about?
Well, the main mechanism is that it is an automatic and universal program. You don't have to apply. You get it automatically because you've been born. And it goes to everyone. And, you know, part of the issue here, one of the critical issues, and in our proposal and in baby bond proposals, which are universal, one second, I lost my chain of thought. One of the real issues is wealth inequality. Today, the top 10% of Americans hold 72% of all financial assets. The bottom 50% of Americans hold 2%. 2%. This is all Federal Reserve data. If you look just at stock, which is independently owned, which is to say outside of pension plans, the top 10% own 87% of stock, and the bottom 50% own 1% of stock. And so this is a real attempt, a nationwide attempt to begin to address the yawning economic and, in particular, wealth inequality that's arisen in America. And tied to that is our other thought and goal about why we wanted to have these accounts invested in a broad index of U.S. companies. And that is, in particular, for children from families in the bottom half, and not just the bottom half, actually the bottom 3/4 of the country. It's a way of giving young people, particularly low and moderate income young people, a stake in the U.S. economy. It's a way to engage them in the central economic process and in the markets of America. And that changes attitude. And we need to change those attitudes. Most recently, a survey by the Pew Research Institute found that 82% of Democrats and 64% of Republicans consider U.S. capitalism fundamentally unfair. And indeed, by creating a universal program that gives people a clear personal financial stake in the developments in the economy, we hope to begin to turn that around.
And then also, and then for the individuals too, right? So they have a stake in the economy, they can look on their phone, they can see what happens on this. And we think that it's going to have broader impacts in terms of financial literacy and financial education. It goes from being an abstract concept from people that don't have this to
Right.
something that actually is meaningful.
We reviewed all the literature on all the baby bond programs. And there's one set in particular that's been very powerful. It's the Oklahoma Seed Program, and which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's particularly useful for economists because when they set it up, they enrolled 3,150 children randomly selected and demographically reflecting the demographics of the area, and they enrolled a parallel control group that didn't receive the savings accounts. And the results were very clear, that it changes attitudes, and not just among the children, but among the parents. That the parents become more involved, They become more financially literate, as do the kids. And the parents, knowing that they have, an initial stake for their children's education, change their behavior with respect to their child's education. They become more involved in their school. The kids have higher attendance. The kids are more likely to graduate. They get better test scores. They have better socialization skills. Now, again, this is all in contrast to a parallel control group. So we know what we're observing. So giving people a stake either through savings accounts or through our approach of stock ownership changes people's view of their own future and what they can accomplish, which is why we see this really striking difference in educational attitudes and educational achievement based on it.
Great. Lauren, anything you want to add here before I open it up to the audience?
Sure. Maybe final thought is anything where we're able to start saving early and where we're able to start at the earliest generation and kind of work that forward, that's really where we'll expand access to retirement security, certainly across generations. And that is really going to be a foundational component as we think about how we chip away at 75% of people globally feeling insecure about retirement in later years. This is a great place to begin from day one and beyond.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, we typically think about saving for retirement, and we typically think about 21, 22 until you retire. Well, we've lost 20, 21, 22 years of compounding, right? And there's only 2 free lunches in the financial markets, which is diversification and compounding. So now you have an extra 20-some years of that. So let me open it up to questions, comments from folks in the audience. Yeah, Dominic.
Yes, I chair a public benefit corp called Moneybird, and we sponsor and manage baby bond programs for low-income families in New Mexico, as well as inner-city Atlanta and inner-city St. Louis. One thing that we've done that we require of all families is that they have to go through financial literacy curriculum and go through it throughout the child's life before they can access the money. So not only the child, but the family have to do that. And the reason we do that is because we believe you just don't want to give people and families, particularly low-income families, fish. You want to teach them how to fish, right? That's number one. The second is when we talk with some of these governments, we're saying that we actually believe that low-income families tend to have large costs on the government. We actually believe over time, if we do this systematically as a country, like the cost to government for social programs would actually go down significantly. And so I have maybe 2 questions for the panelists, and particularly for our Milken panelists. One is your program at the national level going to require financial literacy as an aspect? And second, do you see similar, is there evidence that having wealth at an earlier age with low-income families, that it actually becomes less of a burden on government over time? I was wondering if there's any evidence that you've seen or you can point us in the right direction.
Well, we do, our proposal does include online financial literacy access for every family that receives this Invest America grant. I'd actually like to make it available to everybody. The other question is a very interesting question. We would certainly expect to see it. We did not do that analysis. But, we know, for example, that among low-income minority children who participated in the Oklahoma Seed Program, they were 3 times more likely to attend college than their parallel people in the children in the control group, and 2.5 times more likely to graduate from college. And, you know, the fact is, education is central to being independent, i.e. not dependent on government supports. So I would expect to see that, but, you know, the truth is we did not examine that.
So I want to answer Dominic's question too, because we actually used Echo Northwest to determine ours. The legislation does have a financial literacy component approved by the Treasurer's Office in Senate Bill 397, because I think that's the major aspect of what we're missing right now in most schools and in most societies, especially in poverty driven homes. But the increases that we did see, or the positives, was an increase in educational attainment, a decrease in reliance on public assistance, which I told you in New Mexico it's $10 billion per year, a decrease in stress, breaking intergenerational poverty, of course, increase in financial literacy, decrease in reducing housing costs, the health outcomes for incarceration, for suicide, for violent deaths, for substance abuse, and for mental health all went down. And then the debt reduction, and then the improvement in the job market, which of course, when you're paying property taxes at higher levels, then you're putting more money into your schools, your hospitals, your roads, et cetera. The one thing I wanted to ask a question of you all is it for people that are low income, the program that you're thinking of, or is it for everyone? Because under Dr. Hamilton's viewpoint, he was pretty upset with me at first that I said it was going to be for all New Mexicans. And the reason why I did that is because we're poorest. So if we're all in a line, almost all of my New Mexicans are at the back of the line. So at the end of the day, we're all a lot more poor than the rest of the nation. So that was what convinced him to say, okay, we can pull the data. The second reason why I wanted all of the data was because those who ended up in foster care or ended up with a parent being passed away, this I learned from Treasurer Ma in California. They have a smaller program of baby bonds that's for foster kids and for people who lost their parents during COVID. Massachusetts has a similar program. There's 27 state treasurers that are working on this right now to try to get baby bonds done in one way or another. In New Mexico, like Dominic said, we have community Partnership for Community Action, who has a pilot project that's working on it on a private end and using philanthropy money to utilize and work for that program. Atlanta, Georgia has another pilot project. But the idea is the whole point of generational divide, and to break that is to help those that need it the most. So on my end for your bill, my question would be, why is it for everyone? If we're trying to break the cycle of poverty, it should be for those that are lower income.
The reason it's for everyone is in order to establish national support for it. This is, and our view is that the society and the government should be investing in every child in America, that's part of the mission of national government. And it will be a fairly trivial asset for people at the top. But we also think it's a positive social statement that children from poor families are being treated exactly the same as children from wealthy families. Federal government has more financial resources.
And we don't forego the option of opening up for philanthropists to put additional money in, and they can choose to put in for certain folks, right, in conjunction with their foundations or whatever, for states to kick in money as well. And so, you know, there could be differential amounts for certain ones, but for the reasons Rob said, we thought it was important to have it universal accounts.
And we wouldn't expect high-income people to be adding to their child's account because there's no tax advantage for the individual to do so. And high-income people can start investment accounts for their kids on their own, and many do. So we expect that we would see more of this in moderate and middle-class families than in high-income families.
Yep. Other questions?
I'm curious how, universal basic income was like a popular thing for a while. I'm not sure if that's still like, I know one's income versus wealth, one's for maybe adults versus kids, but how do these connect or not connect? Is there any relation between these types of programs?
I'd call it universal basic wealth rather than universal basic income. Because it creates a foundation of wealth for every child.
What type of guardrails do you envision being in place for this? Like, in a retirement account, you can only take distributions for certain reasons, you have to prove it, all of that. What kind of guardrails do you have in place so it doesn't get absconded by a parent or a brother or bad reasons?
So I'll tell you the New Mexico one. So we have an anti-donation clause in our Constitution right now. So I had to remove the retirement aspect and the entrepreneurship aspect at this point. And we figured within the next 18 years, before the first cohort of 18-year-olds comes out, that we could potentially either change the Constitution just for baby bonds, or maybe they'll decide to change it. So in New Mexico, we're looking at New Mexico homes, New Mexico business developments, so that could be included, and educational purposes. Other than that, we're not able to do very much. And the guardrails were that it would be attached to the child's social security number and not the parent. The financial literacy component has to be done by both, whoever the guardian is, along with the child, and it's approved by the state treasurer's office so that the state treasurer's office can really see if they're teaching financial literacy based on what we think that need would be. I mean, of course, I won't be there, but somebody in government, treasurers are statistically known to be the most responsibly or trusted elected officials in the nation right now. And so we take that with a lot of honor and pride. And so I wanted to make sure it wasn't some rinky-dink contractor that just decided to do something like this so that they can get some kind of money off of it, but that you're really teaching financial literacy. The other aspect is we're looking at financial literacy as a graduation requirement. It's a local option now in New Mexico, but we lost by 1 vote last year. And so today, I'm proud to say that we have 38% of our school districts, our students, that now have financial literacy as a graduation requirement through the local option as an elected official. As an elected curriculum credit. So those are some of the ways I think that the guardrails work. Going through the Department of Finance and Administration for the checks, so the child never gets the check. No one ever touches the money. That's how you get away from the anti-donation clause issue as well. So for example, our New Mexico Lobos, who just won the Mountain West Conference the other day, you would go to UNM, you would have an invoice that would come to the Department of Finance and Administration, they would verify, that the student would verify, and then they would pay out to the university. So it's hands off.
In our case, the accounts are the property of the child, not of the parent. The accounts cannot be touched for the first 18 years, by which time the child would be an adult. And the child would still retain full ownership of the account. And certainly, we would expect that financial institutions would also apply guardrails about the management of the accounts, and the Treasury would be overseeing their work as well.
Yeah, we have time for one final question. I think there was one right over here.
Thank you for organizing this panel. Very excited. I'm with the Mott Foundation in Michigan, and we funded the Seed OK research and the kindergarten to college research out of San Francisco. My question is, both of those programs have a savings component in them. Seed OK, because it's in the 529 system, kindergarten to college. And I'm wondering whether you see that. I think Michael started to talk about a little bit a savings component, philanthropy, others can invest. But I'm curious whether you see opportunities for families to contribute in these accounts as well.
Yes.
Because part of the research that you cited comes from activating that saver
Yes.
identity in the families.
Yes.
And in kindergarten to college, Treasurer Montoya, half the families are, that are saving in the program are eligible for free and reduced price lunch.
In our piece of legislation, we made sure that any benefit from the baby bond would not in any way affect any other services that that family needs. So we did add that portion as well. And I think that also we put a little clause in there that says you're not necessarily going to receive this money, just in case the idea that we can't get the anti-donation issue resolved for those that were not born into Medicaid taken care of, then we can do that as well. But I think it's better to have more information, have more data, so that through the course of their life, we can potentially end up helping them. You know, I'll give you a personal example. I have foster kids, and I wanted to make sure, because there's some parents who just are not good parents. And so I wanted to make sure that it was attached to the Social Security number and not to the child's parents. You know, I heard about a lot of people who lost their parents during COVID, and so that also made me realize, okay, it needs to be attached to the child. I think what also happens, you know, I mentioned the suicide rates and violent crime in New Mexico. You know, unfortunately, we have a lot of substance abuse as well. If you can tell a child that there's money and somebody decided to invest in them, even if they didn't come into the world with a lot, they know that there is something there for them. I think that's those numbers that you're talking about, that it makes people feel more loved and more cared for, and that they're not in it alone. And I think as many young people that we have that are homeless right now, it's an important aspect. You know, we first tried to put in adding in a vehicle, because for some people a vehicle is their home as well. And we couldn't get to that point, but hopefully within the next 18 years somebody's going to figure it out.
All right, great, thanks.
We just answer your question.
Yeah.
We explicitly say that family, friends, local church, et cetera, can add to these accounts. And as you know, since you know the research, there was a very large differential between family savings for their children, for children who were enrolled in this, compared to the control group. So it does seem to induce family saving on top of the baby bond or Invest America account.
All right, great. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So Laura, Lauren, and Rob, thank you so much for a great panel here.